Hey everybody, it's Friday and it is 12 o'clock. I'm going to do my weekly Bible journaling lesson on a topic you guys submitted. And I had several people ask for the book of Jonah, different chapters in the book of Jonah. It's only 4 chapters, so let's just outline the whole thing. It won't take long. Because it's a short book, I'm sure you're familiar with the story. Let me give you some tips on how to take notes in a journaling Bible or just on a piece of paper. I'm using the Artisan Bible. I love this Bible. It's got cat hair on it. It's God is within her, she will not fail. That's what the cover of this one is. And there's lots of different ones that they have. They feature an artist who has designed this. And then they've also got the side of it has like a gold foil design as well. But there's probably 6 different versions. This is the one I picked. But it is an NIV version. I think they've got ESV, CSB. I think they've got a bunch of different versions of it too. But I like this because it has a little bit of room on the side. I also use my illustrating Bible a lot, which has no lines and more room on the side to draw. But I've just been kind of on a kick with this one. So we're going to go with this. All my links are on my faves page. All the Bibles I recommend are at amycenter.com/faves if you're ever wondering what tools and things I use. So let's dig into the book of Jonah. I'll give you a second to grab your Bible, turn to Jonah, and while you're doing that, I'm going to give you an outline real quick of a freebie I've gotten for my subscribers. Is just kind of grouping the genres of the Old Testament together. If you've been to my site for a second, you'll know that the Bible's not in chronological order. They organize it not by the timeline of events, but by the genres. So the first 5 books are the Pentateuch, the law books, the early church, or the early history of man. And then we've also got the history books of after the wilderness wandering, all the way to the kingdom falling apart. And then we've got 4 books about wisdom and poetry. And then the last half of the Old Testament is books by prophets. And all of these prophecies that they're giving, for the most part, are happening during this historical time. So this is the timeline, and these are the prophecies going on during that timeline. So that's where we meet Jonah, and he is down here. These are the books of the Bible in order, the way they're organized in the Bible: Isaiah, Jeremiah, Lamentations, Ezekiel, and Daniel. And they call these the major prophets and these the minor prophets. And really, when you look up why, it's not because these guys were more important or lived longer or anything like that. These books are just longer in length, and these are very short books. So that's the difference between major and minor prophets. So Jonah is one of the minor prophets because his book is short. It's only 4 chapters. So you can get this if you want in my freebie library that I offer for subscribers. So go ahead and subscribe at amycenter.com/subscribe if you want to grab this page. And then I'm going to be referencing my Bible timeline that I created for the book of Jonah. It's a 1-page. It's really simple. It's just got the overview of the book of Jonah. And so I'm going to be referencing that. That's in my shop as well. And it comes with the Micah printable because these books are minor prophets. They're very short. So if you purchase the Jonah one, you get the Micah one as well. So let's start with Jonah chapter 1 and figure out what's going on. It says that Jonah flees from the Lord is the header over here. And before we get started, I like to do this like an English teacher. Let's talk about the character, the setting, the problem, the solution. So let's zoom in on this one so you can see better. You're going to need highlighters and a pen. That's mostly what I use. So the book of Jonah, let's outline it a little bit. Chapter 1, Jonah flees. Chapter 2, Jonah prays. And all I'm doing is looking at my headers to get a gist of what this book is going to be about. So Jonah flees from the Lord. Down here it says Jonah's prayer. Chapter 3, Jonah goes to Nineveh. And chapter 4, Jonah's anger at the Lord's compassion. So we'll get into those in a minute, but let's just outline the book first. Chapter 4, Jonah in Nineveh. Jonah angry. I'm just making these as simple as possible so that when I go back and flip to the book of Jonah, when I'm studying something else and need to reference it, or I'm teaching a class on Jonah to kids or whatever it is, I've got these quick notes right here. So let's look at who, where, I'm going to leave a space right there. What and why. Okay, so who is going to be Jonah? Where, let's read. The word of the Lord came to Jonah, son of Amittai. Go to the great city of Nineveh and preach against it because its wickedness has come up before me. So this is Nineveh. And the reason I had you make a space is because it's really important to know it's the capital of Assyria. If you know anything about Assyria, Assyria are some of the most brutal enemies that the Israelites had. They're really, really violent and corrupt. They torture. It's just a brutal, brutal enemy. So God asks him to preach to them. And the problem is that Jonah, or the why is God wants to give them a chance. Whoops, not change, a chance. Okay, so here's the problem. Jonah is afraid. So his solution, run away. So let me read this text to you. As you're taking these notes, I'm going to read chapter 1 to you. So Jonah flees from the Lord. The word of the Lord came to Jonah, son of Amittai. Go to the great city of Nineveh and preach against it, because its wickedness has come up before me. But Jonah ran away from the Lord and headed for Tarshish. He went down to Joppa, where he found a ship bound for that port. After paying the fare, he went aboard and sailed for Tarshish to flee from the Lord. Then the Lord sent a great wind on the sea, and such a violent storm arose that the ship threatened to break up. All the sailors were afraid, and each cried out to his own God, and they threw the cargo into the sea to lighten the ship. But Jonah had gone below deck, where he lay down and fell into a deep sleep. And the captain went to him and said, "How can you sleep? Get up and call on your God. Maybe he will take notice of us so that we will not perish." Then the sailors said to each other, "Come, let us cast lots to find out who's responsible for this calamity." They cast lots, and the lot fell on Jonah. So they asked him, "Tell us, who is responsible for making all this trouble for us? What kind of work do you do? Where do you come from? What is your country? From what people are you?" I'm actually going, there's a lot of dialogue here, so I'm going to highlight the dialogue. So starting in verse 2, God tells him to go to Nineveh. And then down here in verse 6, the captain tells him, there's a storm. Why are you sleeping? Help us. Verse 6, they cast the lots. And then they ask Jonah, "Why did it fall on you? What is going on? Tell us about you." Then Jonah answers in verse 9, "I'm a Hebrew. I worship the Lord, the God of heaven, who made the sea and the dry land." This terrified them. They asked, "What have you done?" They knew he was running away from the Lord because he'd already told them so. Verse 11. Let me move this up. The sea was getting rougher and rougher, so they asked him, "What should we do to make the sea? What should we do to you to make the sea calm down for us?" "Pick me up and throw me into the sea," he replied, "and it will become calm. I know it's my fault that this great storm has come upon you." Instead, the men did their best to row back to land, but they could not, for the sea grew even wilder than before. And they cried out to the Lord, "Please, Lord, do not let us die for taking this man's life. Do not hold us accountable for killing an innocent man, for you, Lord, have done as you pleased." Then they took Jonah and threw him overboard, and the raging sea grew calm. At this, the men greatly feared the Lord, and they offered a sacrifice to the Lord and made vows to him. So one thing I thought was interesting that I never really noticed before is that you'll notice right here in verse 5, all the sailors were afraid and each cried out to his own God. So right here, it sounds like these men are all worshiping different gods. They have different beliefs. And then down here, they are telling Jonah, "Call on your God, help us out, see what happens. Let's just figure out which God responds." And when they see that Jonah's God responds, they're afraid. They tell God they don't want to kill Jonah because they're afraid of this God, that they're going to be punished. So they try to row back to sea. And then the storm gets worse, so they pray to God. They say, "Please, Lord, do not let us die for taking this man's life." So they know they got to throw Jonah overboard because that's what Jonah said. And they're afraid that God's going to punish them. So they pray to God. And it says, "Do not hold us accountable for killing an innocent man, for you, Lord, have done as you pleased." So not only did they believe, then they prayed. And then after they threw Jonah in, it says in verse 16, "At this the men greatly feared the Lord, and they offered a sacrifice to the Lord and made vows to him." So what I think is interesting is the men on the boat convert. And we don't really talk about this much. We more talk about Jonah not being a good listener to God. He's not a very good prophet right now. But I want to talk about the men on the boat and how they convert. In verse, let's see, backtrack. Verse 5, they pray to different gods. On verse 6, I'm going to circle "call to your God." And that's ask Jonah to pray to his God. Then over here, let's see. When Jonah says he's a Hebrew and worships the Lord, they're scared of that God. So verse 10, the men fear Jonah's God. And then let's keep reading. Right here in verse 14, when they realize they're going to have to throw Jonah overboard, they pray to Jonah's God. That is verse 14. And I'm going to do lowercase for their gods and capital for the true God, just so I don't have to keep repeating the word Jonah. And then in verse 16, they fear the Lord. They offer a sacrifice. They fear the Lord. They offer sacrifices, and they make vows. So in this chapter, I want you to have written all of this information. I think it's really important for the context of what is happening in the rest of the story. Now we go to chapter 2, which is Jonah's prayer. And since I've been highlighting some text, I think I'm going to color code, and it's not a big deal to go over yellow. So I'm going to do Jonah and God in their own colors. So let's do green for God and orange for Jonah. And then the rest can just, anybody else can be yellow. So I'm going to go back up here. This in verse 2 is God's command. So I'm just going to go over that yellow with the green so we can follow all these conversations. The captain talks, the sailors talk. Verse 9, Jonah talks. Then the men talk. They keep talking. Jonah says, put me in the sea. In verse 12. And then the men talk again. And then down to verse 2, Jonah's been thrown into the water and he is going to pray. It says verse 17 of chapter 1 is included in the prayer. It says, now the Lord provided a huge fish to swallow Jonah. So it's not technically a whale, which a lot of us, I know this, but I still call it a whale. But it might not be a whale because a whale is technically a mammal, not a fish. But just a note that we learn it's a whale when we're little, and it's really not. Okay, Jonah was in the belly of the fish 3 days and 3 nights. From inside the fish, Jonah prayed to the Lord his God, and he said, so I'm going to just highlight, since this is really long, I like to do this. So I'm not just destroying my highlighter. And that just signifies that all of this is the same person talking. I also wanted to just write down that he was in the fish. Let's just do one of these. That's really easy. He was in there 3 days and 3 nights. Okay, here's his prayer. He said, in my distress, I called to the Lord, and he answered me. From deep in the realm of the dead, I called for help, and you listened to my cry. You hurled me, just so you could see this. You hurled me into the depths, into the very heart of the seas, and the currents swirled about me. All your waves and breakers swept over me. I said, I have been banished from your sight, yet I will look again toward your holy temple. The engulfing waters threatened me. The deep surrounded me. I'm going to write just some things I noticed. He's trusting again over here. He's asking for help. Okay, the engulfing waters threatened me. The deep sea surrounded me. Seaweed was wrapped around my head. To the roots of the mountains I sank down below. The earth beneath me bared forever. But you, my Lord, my God, brought my life up from the pit. He is giving him credit. When my life was ebbing away, I remembered you, Lord, and my prayer rose to you, to your holy temple. So he worshiped him. Those who cling to worthless idols turn away from God's love for them. So he's calling others to repent. But I with shouts of grateful praise will sacrifice to you. What I have vowed, I will make good. I will say salvation comes from the Lord. So he, right here, what I have vowed, I will make good. Jonah follows through on his promise to God and repents. Then the Lord commanded the fish, and it vomited Jonah onto the dry land. So I'm going to write, then it vomited Jonah onto dry land. Okay, so chapter 3, Jonah goes to Nineveh. Remember, Nineveh is a terrible place that nobody wants to be. So he is relying on God for the strength to do what he needs to do. And although this seems like a terrible thing that he went through, which it really is, it was this trial that he went through that gave him the heart change to realize, if I can make it through that, I can make it through these things, because I've got God on my side, and God has called me to this, and he is going to be with me every step of the way. So this is another reminder that God doesn't necessarily protect us and keep us safe always over our need to change and do the things that he's called us to do, which is a really, really hard truth to live through. But if you're going through a trial, I really encourage you to remember that this trial is not the end of your story, that sometimes it's the beginning of your story, and sometimes your story can't even be written the way you've prayed it to go unless you go through a hard trial. So that's just my side note from personal experience. Let's look at chapter 3, verse 1. Then the word of the Lord came to Jonah a second time. Go to the great city of Nineveh and proclaim to it the message I give you. So I'm going to highlight where God starts talking again in verse 2. Jonah obeyed the word of the Lord and went to Nineveh. Now Nineveh was a very large city. It took 3 days to go through it. Jonah began by going a day's journey into the city, proclaiming, 40 more days and Nineveh will be overthrown. So this is not something you really want to... I understand why he's scared to have to make this prophecy. The Ninevites believed God. A fast was proclaimed, and all of them, from the greatest to the least, put on sackcloth. And when Jonah's warning reached the king of Nineveh, he rose from his throne, took off the royal robes, covered himself with sackcloth, and sat down in the dust. This is the proclamation he issued in Nineveh. So right here, this is the king talking. I'm going to do that in yellow. And he has basically expected to be killed when he tells people this. And the people believe what Jonah is saying, and they're turning and repenting to God. And so that's just another lesson in trusting God, even when it feels like the opposite of what you want to do, is really, really, there's a lot to the story, more than just Jonah being in a fish or a whale, whatever we learn in elementary school. When God saw what they did and how they turned from their evil ways, he relented and did not bring on them the destruction he had threatened. And then in chapter 4, this is where Jonah gets upset. Why might he be upset? Because they're such a terrible people and he wants them punished. And God's showing compassion and mercy and grace and against their enemies. And this reminds me of when Jesus calls us to love our enemies. Which is a very hard truth. But I love finding connections of Old Testament ideologies reflected in the New Testament, when a lot of people feel like Old Testament has nothing to do with New Testament. It has everything to do with it. And I love finding those places that they overlap and kind of foretell what's coming. So chapter 4, to Jonah this seemed very wrong, and he became angry. He prayed to the Lord, "Isn't this what I said, Lord, when I was still home? That is what I try to forestall by fleeing to Tarshish. I knew that you are a gracious and compassionate God, slow to anger and abounding in love, a God who relents from sending calamity. Now, Lord, take away my life, for it's better for me to die than live." So Jonah is so upset about this. He literally asks God to kill him. Just end this, because I can't even handle this. And God replies, "Is it right for you to be angry?" And I do want to note that anger isn't a sin. Remember Jesus in the temple or tabernacle, flipping the tables And the Lord is angry all throughout the Bible. He also has compassion all throughout the Bible. He has emotions like we have emotions. But what he's telling Jonah is not anger is a sin, but in this instance, should you really be angry or should you be rejoicing with me? Jonah had gone out, this is verse 5, and sat down at a place east of the city. And there he made himself a shelter, sat in its shade, and waited to see what would happen to the city. Then the Lord God provided a leafy plant and made it grow up over Jonah to give shade for his head to ease his discomfort. And Jonah was very happy about the plant. I don't even remember this. But at dawn the next day, God provided a worm which chewed the plant so it withered. And when the sun rose, God provided a scorching east wind, and the sun blazed on Jonah's head so he grew faint. He wanted to die, and he said, "It would be better for me to die than to live." Whoops. But God said to Jonah, "Is it right for you to be angry about the plant?" "It is," he said. "I'm so angry, I wish I were dead." And the Lord said, "You have been concerned about this plant, though you did not tend it or make it grow. It sprang up overnight, and it died overnight. And should I not have concern for the great city of Nineveh, in which there are more than 120,000 people who cannot tell their right hand from their left, and also many animals." And then the book ends. We don't even get Jonah's reply. Which I find is very interesting as well. The book ends here. No reply from Jonah. I believe that it ends here because what God says to him is like what God says to Job, is basically in a compassionate way, he's telling him, who do you think you are? You did not create these people. You don't get to make decisions about their fate. He's telling Jonah, this plant that I just gave you, that gave you shelter and it made you happy, you didn't tend to it. You didn't grow it. You didn't do anything about it. So you have no right to be angry when it's gone. So he's basically putting Jonah in his place like he puts Job in his place and says, if you're going to trust me, if you're going to follow me, you've got to trust me. And remember, I created you. I created this plant. I created these people. And so I think that there's no reply from Jonah because he is wrestling with a heart change here. I don't believe that Jonah went on and said, I still would rather die. Or I think that he would have added that to the book. But that's my speculation. We don't know what happens. But from my experience of reading Job and other passages in the Bible and just the wording of this, it makes me feel like God proved his point, and so they didn't need to add anything else. So I think that's really interesting. Of course, I want to draw something, so I'm going to draw a picture of the plant that provided the shelter for Jonah. And then I'm going to just kind of write what God said about it. You have been concerned about this plant, though you did not tend it or make it grow. It sprang up overnight and died overnight. And should I not have concern for the great city of Nineveh, in which there are more than 120,000 people who cannot tell their right hand from their left, and also many animals? So he said, I'm going to write verse 10. You have not been concerned. I guess this whole thing. Oh, no. You have been concerned about this plant, though you did not tend it or make it grow, is what I'm going to write. And that, I'm going to write over here God's question as well. Is it right for you to be angry about the plant? Or actually, I'm just going to write verse 4. Is it right for you to be angry? And then I'm going to draw a little angry face up here. My little angry face guy. And then flip back over here, see if there's anything else I want to illustrate. Over here, Nineveh. I have a map of Nineveh, although it's because over here in Joel, I've got a map of the Assyrian Empire. And right here, you can see is Judah and Israel. In my old maps, Judah and Israel were blown up because they were their entire world. These are not small areas. So that shows you how huge the Assyrian Empire was. And it was a ruthless people. And then I know that I've got a picture of, or a little map, probably in the, yes, Nahum is also a book that predicts the destruction of the capital of Nineveh. What is this, Narnia? The capital of Nineveh. Assyrians were known for their brutality. They impaled, beheaded, burned, and tortured their enemies. Nahum talks about when Nineveh was eventually destroyed, but this was after 150 years after Jonah. So I've even got that reference in there for you. Let me see if there's anything else over here about Nineveh. I've got Assyria and Nineveh references all throughout my timelines because they had a lot to do with what the Israelites were going through. But I just wanted to let you know, I am actually working on compiling all of my maps in my timelines, plus adding a few extra to have as a resource. Like I have my Bible genealogy resource page. So I'm going to have a Bible maps resource page coming out in June, which I'm really excited to share with you so that you can use that as a reference when you're doing this kind of stuff. So for right now, let's just draw a little makeshift map. This is the Mediterranean Sea. This is Israel, where the Israelites live, and then basically trying to get you to basically everything else is the Assyrian Empire. Whoop. So that goes, since they took over them, it's going to include them. And just be all of this right there. So you can even color code that if you want for your little map. I try not to do it too thick, otherwise it will go through the other side. Just like one little coat. Yay, now you have a cute little map in there. So girls, I hope you enjoyed this. And guys, I hope you enjoyed this lesson on the book of Jonah, just trying to figure out how to take some notes. I gave you a lot of different techniques in here. Just pick and choose what you like. If you're not sure where to start with other pages, you can, or with other books of the Bible, you can watch my other Bible journaling videos. grab my Bible journaling cheat sheets. More are coming to the shop all the time. And then the Bible maps is coming soon. So make sure that you comment with what you would like me to outline next time so that your suggestions are included with the other lists that I have. Thank you so much. I hope you have a wonderful weekend, and I hope that you learned something about the book of Jonah you didn't know before. So have a great week. I'm actually not going to be here next week. We're skipping next Friday because I'm going to be at the beach. So I'm really excited about that. So I'll see you in 2 weeks. Love you guys. Thank you so much. Have a great weekend.